Welcome back to another episode of the SBC Audio Experience. This episode of the Sports Business Classroom Audio Experience is from a previously recorded webinar on how teams approach the NBA trade deadline, hosted by Bobby Marks and Eric Pincus. Throughout the webinar, they discuss the ins and outs of the trade deadline, answer relevant questions from our live Q&A, and more. Bobby and Eric provide excellent insights on how front offices operate through one of the busiest times of the NBA calendar. Let's get into it.
Welcome. I guess we'll kind of stall a little bit, just sort of introduce ourselves. And we are, of course, I'm Eric Pincus. This is Bobby Marks. I'm with Bleacher Report. He's with ESPN, and both of us are with Sports Business Classroom. We're going to talk about how NBA teams approach the trade deadline. We're with Sports Business Classroom. I want to encourage everyone to sign up on our website, just sportsbusinessclassroom.com. For the early interest list for our Vegas Immersive, which is honestly the most fun I think I have each year. Bobby and I did it last year and had an absolute wonderful time. And then we've got some other stuff to talk about. But Bobby, welcome first of all. And are you ready for this deadline?
Listen, I think I'm exhausted already, and we're not even a week away from I think Jimmy Butler probably has left us a lot exhausted here. But yeah, excited for, I think this might be my 30th trade deadline. Go back to my days with the New Jersey / Brooklyn Nets, and certainly we'll talk about some of the experiences that I had with both organizations as far as how we prepare. Certainly different era with different rules, which makes certainly things a little bit more complicated, and we're gonna certainly go through that. Over the next hour, I guess hour and a half. We will spend some time at the end of this session answering all different type of different questions and stuff like that. I would prefer probably not going into like hypotheticals and stuff like that, but if you ask a Jimmy Butler question and why does Bradley Beal have a no trade clause and stuff like that, we'll be more than happy to answer as far as whatever you guys want out there.
Yeah, I love the hypotheticals, but it's more of a matter of time. I mean, we could literally do this for probably, I think the appetite would be 8 hours if we let the group go, just going by the past. So we do have a hard out at some point. But yeah, definitely hit us up in the Q&A. We will do our best. I'll glance at the chat, but honestly, we are probably not going to see it. So Q&A is your best bet. Jordan, if you can go to the next slide. I just want to let everyone know about Bobby's new CBA Mastery version 2. This is fully updated rules on how the CBA works for the 2023 CBA. And you get a special discount just from attending with the promo code trade deadline. That's one word, all no caps. And that's through February the 5th, cbamastery.com. And we'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later. But if you are interested in learning, this is a self-directed course that you take on your own. And it's really wonderful. We put a lot of work into it. I know Bobby did. I put a lot of work behind the scenes as well. And it's a great tool if you want to understand what the heck is going on. And especially if you're looking into, number one, getting into the industry, or you're just a super hyper crazy fan and you want to understand what the hell is going on. So, but Bobby, let's kind of talk in general, with our theme is how NBA teams approach the deadline. And give a little backstory. Obviously you came up through the New Jersey Nets, eventually the Brooklyn Nets, spent your NBA career there before moving on to the media side. As you said, this is like your 30th deadline. You spent at least 20 of them were with the team. So what is the process? When do you start preparing for the trade deadline? And when is it like all hands on deck where are you working around the clock at this point? What's the situation?
Yeah, I mean, usually the situation is well, it's funny. It used to be, Eric, that the trade deadline was after All-Star weekend. And you would have like that weekend where there was basically you and your front office and your group in the office, and then it would kind of lead into the trade deadline. They did away with that because it became a major distraction when players were being traded on the All-Star game, right? It kind of took away from that. I would say that the process is probably a year-long process. It doesn't mean teams are ready to trade a player in August or September. There is an evaluation period. Usually you always hear teams saying that there's like, we want to see where our team is after 20 games. There's certainly restrictions that come in play. Most free agents who sign contracts can't be traded to December 15th. The history has shown that I would say 90% of trades, regular season trades, happen the week of trade deadline week, whether that, leading up to that, from that Sunday up into that Thursday. We've had a couple already in December, which are somewhat unique, but I think there's probably, I guess, special circumstance type situations, and we'll certainly talk about it. But just going back to New Jersey and Brooklyn, and certainly where teams are now, a lot of this is just built on relationships. Like, a lot of this is relationships. A lot of it is trust. I always give the story. When I was in Brooklyn, and Pete D'Alessandro was in Sacramento, and it always doesn't have to be transactional. You don't have to call and ask about a player or a pick or whatever. Like, you could kind of just talk about like life, right? Like, and I remember Pete and I had a good relationship, and we talked about like our kids. Our kids were younger at the time. We had something in common, and then that kind of just led into we needed shooting in Brooklyn. I said, "Hey, what are you guys thinking about Marcus Smart? Marcus Thornton. Would you guys do something for him?" He's like, "Yeah, I think we would. Hey, we like Reggie Evans, right?" Like, that's somehow how the conversations go. Certainly, when you're looking at players like Jimmy Butler or Brandon Ingram, that's a little bit of a different animal in that course, because now you're with how the rules are. You're like, okay, we like Jimmy Butler, but we don't want to take this person back with it, right? Like, there's all these different things. We got to go find a third team or a fourth team, and you're like, I always call it like the deck of cards, right? Like, you got to build this deck, and all of a sudden you pull one card and the whole thing tears down. So a lot of it is, as I say, kind of relation building, kind of who your connections are, who you're comfortable. A lot of teams, like there was a pattern where Utah and Cleveland made a lot of trades together, like, because there's a comfort level. Things never got out from either organization here. I do think you see more of a pressing urgency when we get to Thursday, because there's a clock, right? When there's a clock and there's a 3 p.m. Eastern and noon deadline, teams act with a certain urgency to try to get deals done. Some of the deals, if a team does do, sometimes it's better walking away than kind of feeling you're pressed to do. It's like, it's okay to walk away. I always say it's okay to walk away and then kind of recalibrate in the off season.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's the leverage points of a team like Utah where there is no compelling reason for them to make a move. It doesn't get them out of the tax. No one's expiring of any note. Whereas with Washington, you could say the same thing with maybe Valanciunas, where they don't need to move him now, but Brogdon is expiring. So maybe there's a more of a pressing need. So some of these are situational. And I find that talking to a lot of people and going through this, relationships, as you mentioned, and trust can be really everything. And I think it's why sometimes you see deals that do happen continually. Washington made a bunch of deals with the Lakers, 2 or 3 under the Tommy Shepard era. You just kind of, you and I know we trace these things and track them. And for those who are aspiring to get into the industry, paying attention to details like that, what GMs, because they move team to team, made deals with other GMs, and what relationships you might have. Maybe there's a Danny Ainge Boston Celtics relationship, because they're at least from some point of view, a Kevin McHale, Danny Ainge relationship that might have led to the Kevin Garnett trade. So the human side of it is everything. We talk a lot at Sports Business Classroom about making connections and networking and relationships, and they really do start at the most simple level of just being kind to people, getting to know people, and fostering those relationships. And hopefully, it might take 5, 10, 15 years for an entry level, someone who just wants to get into a position where they can help make an impact on a trade. But I do find that it's that deadline, that requirement that forces teams to act. I was impressed, though, with the Nets this year in that they made the deals that they did earlier. And last year we did have some deals in December earlier. We've had about the same amount this year and last.
Yep.
Which is more than it's been in recent years before the deadline. Why do you think they were so eager or willing to execute those deals? They traded Dennis Schroeder and they traded Dorian Finney-Smith and Shake Milton, and they got a bunch of seconds. Why? What was different with the Nets in triggering when they triggered?
I think the longer you wait for some of those deals, it probably maybe doesn't become available for you, or maybe a team goes in a different direction. Let's say if hypothetically in the Shooter situation, they don't trade him, and Mike Dunleavy Jr. says, you know what, we're going to go in a different direction with a different player and at the deadline. Certainly a little bit of different circumstance because both, Brooklyn is looking to kind of count ping pong balls and Golden State was trying to, win some games. They were sliding at the time. I think there is I think there is this, I think there's a sense of, like we saw last year with OG Anunoby and Pascal Siakam, two Toronto players that got moved early because, certainly for the Raptors, you're looking, all right, we're going to reset the roster. We want to be positioned pretty well in the lottery. Then there's the case of, Thomas Bryant gets traded from Miami to Indiana. Indiana has, they've got back there, James Wiseman, Isaiah Jackson are hurt, right? Like they need a backup center. Like we're not going to wait until February 6th to go out and get one. Then you look at the trade that happened last week, which is probably one of the more unique trades where it doesn't involve players, where it's involved picks with Phoenix trading their unprotected 2031 for 3 picks from Utah. Now Phoenix knows, okay, I've got these in my back pocket for the, leading up until the 6th to go out and shop Josip Nurkic or Grayson Allen or, Bradley Beal or one of these other players here. So that kind of just sets the table, getting a deal done as far as not waiting until the last minute, because what you have on the day of the deadline, which you think might not be there. If you're Golden State, just a hypothetical, and you think your goal is to get under a luxury tax, and you've got a deal today where you can move a $6 million or $7 million player, and it costs you a future second, you're going to do it because like that probably same deal either won't be there on the deadline or might, and you got to keep your fingers crossed.
Yeah, I like to say it's very quickly a menu of bad choices at the deadline. And I know from the fan point of view, and even what I do as a writer for Bleacher Report, they asked me to generate a lot of what ifs. How would it look if Jimmy Butler was traded to this team? How would it look if Giannis was traded? How would it look if De'Aaron Fox? There's news that these things might happen. They asked me to put it into whatever my filter is to try to give a semi-reasonable answer as to what it could look like. But when you actually get down to the deadline and you're trying to trade, say, Jimmy Butler, the Heat might look at a menu of 5 choices or 3 choices or 1 choice, none of which they like. And then you're basically holding your nose and picking the one you like, I guess you dislike the least. And so when you are the Nets, and yes, you could hold out for a first for Dennis, or you could hold out for a first for Dorian Finney-Smith, but those players could get injured. The other teams, as you mentioned, could move on, or you end up maybe getting less at that point. So it's the bird in the hand type argument of actually executing and not worrying about what you could have gotten. And I don't, if you play the stock market and you want to sell or buy a stock, it's always about trying to time it. If you're trying to time everything perfectly all the time, you're probably not going to succeed. It's about maybe getting 80% or 90% of what you hope to get, or maybe it's a loss. Maybe you're accepting in the Heat. Maybe they end up taking on a player they don't really want. If they took a Middleton, for instance, maybe they don't want Middleton. Maybe his salary is too much for them. But if it solves this problem for them and the rest of the components make sense, maybe that's the bullet they're willing, the holding of the nose and saying, okay, we'll do this. Not that he's a good player. He's just often hurt and expensive. So
I would say this too. One more thing, like regular season trades are very difficult because you want to eliminate the emotional element to things, right? So if you're the Lakers and AD's out for a week, right? He's got a strained muscle or abduct or something, and you don't want to be like, oh, we got to go get a center, and we're willing to give up 2 first, unprotected first, right? Like the regular season is for the trade deadline perspective is a challenge because it's real time when you're doing these. You're coming off a loss. You've lost 3 in a row. Your owner's calling you. What can we do to get better? Where the regular or the off season, it isn't. The off season is the honeymoon, right? Everybody loves their roster. This player looks good in Detroit or Golden State. And then you trade for that player, and now you're trying to incorporate that player. You trade for a player on Thursday, then they play Friday, and you're trying to get fortunately you have All-Star break, but you're trying to get that player up to speed for the last 25 to 30 games of the regular season.
Right. And you have to also decide, is it worth it? Are you in the East, and are you good enough? Can you improve enough to beat the Celtics and the Cavaliers? And then you see that they're 5-5 in the last 5 games. And to your point, are you overreacting to their struggles? Indiana, for instance, they're rolling, right? They've won, I think, 8 of the last 10. So does Indiana think differently because of their recent push and that they've gained ground? Whereas in the West, are you good enough to compete with Oklahoma City? Are you good enough to compete with Denver and get past Jokic? And then you have teams like Miami where they do have a first that if they give it this year, they don't give it this year, next year it goes unprotected. And so maybe they, making the playoffs for them, there's extra motivation. So there's so many factors that go into it. We can't possibly cover them all, but there are some very human elements that go into this, and trying to take that worldwide broad view has to be difficult in the middle of the ups and downs. I saw Daryl Morey. This was very casual early on in the season. I saw him at the Clippers, and I was happy to see him because I hadn't seen him for a minute. So I was like, "Hey, how you doing?" He's like, "Not great." I'm like, "Oh yeah. They're doing terribly." I wasn't thinking about it from like, "Oh yeah, your team is absolutely a mess." I was just like, "Hey, what's that? Good to see you." So there is that human element. I was thinking we should probably touch. Because of our what we do, touch on some of the rules and kind of dig in to some of how this works. And I don't want us to spend too much time on it, but sort of skim through some of the things that our viewers need to sort of be cognizant of. So we have some of these trades. Anything you want to highlight? You mentioned on some of them.
Yeah, I mean, you had asked why do it now? Why not wait? And I think the Charlotte trade with Phoenix is kind of an example. Phoenix had not been playing well. Nurkic is sick. He's out of the rotation. You're looking for a guy that could start or a backup big. The cost is certainly 3 seconds. That's, if that's presented to you, there's probably nothing better to come about when you get to February 6th, and certainly when you're a second apron team like the Suns, and you're trading away a $8.2 million salary, you basically have a small window as far as what you can actually take back. In contracts, and Nick Richards at $5 million, and you get a kind of a 1 month jump start ahead of everyone else.
Yeah, I get a lot of Laker fans asking me, why didn't the Lakers get Nick Richards? I'd written on him as one of their fallback positions, but after the trade for Dorian Finney-Smith, all the Lakers have are 2 seconds in 2025, this coming draft, and they projected the Lakers and the Clippers. Right now, they're call it 50, 51 in that range, and most players drafted 50 to 51 are probably two ways, and if they're not two ways, maybe they're not even coming over from overseas, or maybe they're like Bronny at 55 is on a regular contract, but most players in that range aren't. And so if the Lakers are offering Christian Wood, who's hurt and has no player value, and maybe Jalen Hood-Schifino or something like that, and they're offering these 2 relatively crappy seconds. Well, I looked at the Hornets and they had 3 seconds already in 2025. So they net 3. I mean, you can say, oh, well, it's only 2 net seconds because they gave up a second, the Hornets. But they gave up the Denver pick, which is probably better than the Lakers and the Clippers at this point. So 55, 56 in that range. And they get 3 potentially better picks all the way down the road. Now, of course, we don't know how good they'll be, and they may be terrible picks down the road, but there's that potential. How how much are teams attracted to like knowing something is mediocre versus like, okay, maybe down the road it might be good, even if it probably won't be, it might be. How appealing is that little bit of extra maybe?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think the second round, I mean, as far as the second round picks, I think there's always kind of like, I don't know what 2026 Denver would be in picks going to be like. It might, like Jokic is under contract, but hey, 2031 Phoenix first, right? Or 2031 Phoenix, second. That's enticing to me because I don't know where that roster is going to be. The further along you go, I think picks are more valuable. Most guys are under contract for 3 or 4 years. You don't know. It's hard to project out. And I think that's kind of where you kind of leave yourself a little bit vulnerable. Like you could say in the draft, in a during trade, hey, I'm going to send you a 2030 second. Well, that second, 5 years from now, could be the 32nd pick in the draft or the 33rd pick in the draft. And that's kind of the risk that goes with it.
Yeah, every draft, obviously, you don't know who's going to be in the draft. Some drafts are deep. Generally speaking, there's a higher value for like a 31 to 40 range pick, 31 to 39. And then when you get into the 40s, those are like maybe high 40s have some value. After you get past 45, you're pretty much either in two ways or guys who are unlikely to make an impact. And you could cite Isaiah Thomas as a 60th pick and the exceptions to the rule. But generally speaking, they're not that valuable. But at the same time, we're seeing like for the Suns, this was a very valuable move, getting a starting center potentially for them. He might not be a starting center in most places, but for them, a starting center for 3 seconds and a player that they don't really need. So it's sort of a first round picks have a greater value, but just a bunch of seconds can be very helpful. And it's where teams tend to play around a little bit. Let's go on to the next slide, Jordan, and see what we have cooking. Let's get to some of the rules as well, Bobby.
Yeah. So this is, and this goes for any front office as far as when you're going through the process. There's kind of like there's like a checklist we call it, right? As far as what you need to kind of make sure it works. 15 players on standard contracts. That's the most you can have on your roster. That doesn't include two-way players. So if you're the Heat and you're trying to trade Jimmy Butler to, I don't know, Golden State, for example, and they're trying to trade you 4 players and you only have 1 going out, you got to do the math, right? As far as that's why we see 3rd and 4th teams coming in, because you can't exceed the allotment as far as with players. The offseason, there's more flexibility, 21 players, including players on two-way contract. There's more flexibility there as far as from a roster standpoint. So it's important to know what your roster is when you're making that trade. If you're doing a 3-for-1, okay, now I would have 16. I got to find a home for somebody else to include in a deal. That's where it gets a little bit more complicated when you get more teams involved here. The structure of the trade. Are we acquiring that player with cap space? Detroit is the only team right now that has cap space. Are we acquiring the player with the traded player exception? And we'll go through that in a little while. Are we acquiring player with 100% traded player exception? The teams that are in the apron, those first and second apron teams. So when you look at it, if you're trading a 30 million, if you're an apron team and you're trading a $30 million player for a $28 million player, you're allowed to do that. I think people got confused because people thought, oh, that has to match up like dollar for dollar. No, you just can't take more than what you are sending back. The other thing too is with minimum contracts, when you're dealing with apron teams, traded player exception, veteran minimum exception, 2 different things. If I'm trading John Smith on a veteran minimum to Phoenix, you're allowed to do that, even though they're a second apron team. The other things you have to check is there a trade bonus in the contract? Trade bonuses impact. Zach LaVine's got a trade bonus in his contract, 15% of what is owed to his on his salary, not including the player option. I think the number is like $8 million, somewhere $8 million. You divide over the 2 years. You have to apply that to salary if Zach LaVine is not willing to waive that. The player has the right to waive or reduce that. Incentive bonuses, like these are, incentive bonuses in trades were not really important prior to this CBA. The only reason why it would be important is if a player was on the path of earning that bonus. If players have likely and unlikely bonuses. Likely is if the player achieved the stat before the year from last year, or if the team had team success. Now, under this CBA, unlikely bonuses count towards the apron. If you're a team out there and you want to go get Kyle Kuzma or Cam Johnson, it's not just the salary fitting within the traded player exception. It's the bonuses that count towards the apron. Bonuses count no matter what. If the player has not earned it and will not earn it, it will continually count against the apron. And then there's trade restrictions, which is more about players who sign contracts in the offseason as free agents. Most players have that December 15th restriction. There are some players that have a 1-year bird restriction, what we call it. Basically, they were a free agent. They would have early bird or bird rights. They signed a 1-year contract. Some players can void the 1-year bird. Some players have that in their or it comes with it, where you have the right to approve any trade. You have to take that into consideration also. Of course, the Bradley Beal situation is one of the most rare situations because he's got a true no trade clause. It's him and LeBron are the only two players in the NBA that had to have it that met the criteria, have a no trade clause, have strict veto power on that. And as everyone has read, the no trade carries with you. You get traded to Miami, the no trade carries with you unless you agree to amend that from there.
Yeah, obviously there's a lot to think about. That's before you're even talking to your owner, the team owner. That's before you're talking to other teams. It has to actually work. It has to make sense. And that can be very problematic. Some examples would be like if Utah, for instance, were to trade John Collins, just hypothetically, and they were getting 3 players back. Let's say that the 3 players they were getting back, 2 of them, they have no interest in keeping. They can't say, okay, we'll trade for those 2 guys and then we'll cut them. They have to be able to absorb them first. So they might have to cut Patty Mills, or they might have to include Patty Mills in the trade. And then can the other team take Patty Mills? And maybe they can't. So maybe they cut Patty Mills. Maybe they're trading another player. And this is obviously hypothetical. You have to worry about the roster space. That can get very difficult. And it's why you might see a team like Toronto, who wants to potentially move Bruce Brown. They reduce their roster to 14. They cut Bruno Fernando to get to 14 so that they have that extra space. Other things, as you mentioned, are apron restrictions. Only about half the league is above the tax. Most of the league isn't in the tax. Most are under. So most of those teams don't care about aprons, but a significant number do. Obviously, the teams all the way at the top, Phoenix, Boston, Milwaukee, Minnesota, a few others that are in that range or right below, they have to worry about the Cam Johnson and the Kyle Kuzma type incentives. And then the trade bonus, there is a limit. Jimmy Butler does have a trade bonus, but it's a small one because a player can't earn more than the max. He could waive it, knowing Jimmy Butler. My guess is he does not waive it just because he's Jimmy Butler, and I don't think he's giving up any money. Although, who knows? It may come down to...
How ironic was that, Eric, that Miami, who is currently suspended him, would have to pay him a $417,000 trade bonus?
That's why he's not going to... I mean, he's not going to wait. He's like... It's just not... people ask me, like, is Jimmy crazy? Is he like he's a pro? No, like Jimmy is, in my mind, being a businessman. I wrote about that Miami is going to potentially... I wrote this over the summer. Like, they should consider trading Jimmy before the season because it has the real potential, if they choose not to pay him, which it sounds like they won't, of absolutely going south. And it's not like I'm a genius to see that coming, but here we are. And so he's operating out of what's best for him and his career. And like James Harden took a very aggressive approach in Houston. I mean, he was literally on camera lambasting, Daryl Morey at that point to get traded from, am I getting it right? Yeah, to get traded from the Sixers.
Yeah.
And so, like, yeah, sometimes that's your job. If we have agents, I know we have some agents who have taken our program and are in the webinar. Like your job, from the team side, this is terrible. What they're doing is horrible, and it's just absolutely the end of the world. However, on the agent side, what they're doing is sometimes what you need to have your client do. Sometimes you have to throw the weight around that they have and create the leverage if you can. May backfire, may not work. But if Jimmy gets where he wants to go and gets paid the money that Miami won't get him, then all that suspension money will have been an investment in that next contract. He loses however much, but he gets his money in an extension. That's a successful gambit by the agent, Bernie Lee in this case, and Jimmy, who is a player who is willing to go those extra lengths. I don't think Damian Lillard perhaps was willing to go as far as Jimmy, and he ended up in a good situation, arguably, in Milwaukee with Giannis. We could debate whether it's good or not. But that all these rules that Bobby just went through are even before you start negotiating. You have to map these things out. So if there are any aspiring salary cap strategists, understanding these rules so that when your team is getting together to try to figure out what might work, you have to at least make sure it's legal or it makes sense. And then one last point is that I 100% agree with the examine how the trade impacts the cap tax apron now and the future. I don't look at the now as much as I used to. The now was everything in the past. It was a lot harder to make trades. It's a lot easier to make trades. Harder for the Suns and those 4 or 5 teams that are way at the top. But for everyone else, it's easier to make trades. However, you have to look at what the impact is next year. And if the team ends up like you're at the second apron, most teams will stop there. And even if they don't, it's so limited that you have to be satisfied with who your team is next year. If you make a move now, that puts you at that second apron. If you have no way out of that financial situation, that might make sense. For Boston, it makes sense because they have a championship team. And so their investment that goes on till next year makes sense because they're still a contender. But for those teams that are not, are you going to invest and go all in on something and not know that it works and then have that exact same team next year, minus a few minimum guys and be completely stuck, which it's great if it works. It's great if you're the Celtics, but it's not great if you're anyone else. All right. You want to talk about some of the minimum requirements going into it?
Yeah. So basically the minimum requirements as far as what's needed to send out in a trade, the minimum requirement, this is for 2 teams involved. And then certainly on the right-hand side, it's 3+ teams, minimum of 110,000 in cash. I am trading player X to Brooklyn. I can include 110,000. There has to be a player contract come back or a future draft pick that does not protect more than 55 positions, draft rights to a player. Remember, a team that is over the second apron is not allowed to send cash in a trade. That makes it a little bit more complicated if you're trying to get off, I don't know, if Boston's trying to get off a salary, they can't attach cash to pay that salary. It's if they, they can include a future pick, the rights to a player, but it does limit you as far as those second apron teams as far as what you include in a deal. So there's got to be something coming back, and there has to be something going. You just can't trade. I can't trade Eric Pincus to the Lakers and just say have a nice day. Like he's got to send me back something.
Yeah, I'm a 5'7" power forward past a certain age, so yeah, I don't think that would be true.
3+ teams is certainly a little more enhanced, I would say. As you can see, the cash increases. It has to be a minimum of 1.1 million, a future draft pick that will convey. That's important. It's not a top 55 second, basically a throwaway pick that we see sometimes. The player contracts, and then certainly draft rights to a prospect. The interesting when we say the draft rights to a prospect, it's a player that was drafted, did not sign an NBA contract, is playing overseas right now. We had a situation in New Jersey where we tried to include a player, the rights to a player, but he had retired. The league looks into that as far as if that player is still playing. I think he had been on the league for like 10 years, and we tried to include him in to make the trade work. But it's got to be a draft rights to one of your players that you drafted. as far as it is still playing somewhere overseas.
So a swap might not convey, right?
Right.
So a minimal requirement can be a swap for a 2-team trade. But if you say a 3-team trade and you want to do a swap, but you have to guarantee that it conveys, there would have to be some sort of language that if the swap doesn't convey, then maybe a second or something like that.
Yeah.
I was thinking, because of time, Jordan, if we can jump to slide 18 and we could talk a little bit about the traded player exception and how these trades mathematically work. I'll just preface by saying the teams over the apron don't have access to taking back more than they send out. Now, that doesn't apply to minimums. You could always take in a minimum player, but if you send out like a $10 million player, you can take back a 10 million, you could take back 2 5s. If the player's making 10 million and $1, no, that's $1 too many, not going to happen. But for those other teams, the teams that aren't, they can bring back more than they send out. And Bob, if you could walk us through how that math works.
Yeah, I mean, there's basically kind of 3 different trade brackets here. There's the 0 to $7.5 million bracket. So if I'm sending out a $4 million or $3 million player and I want to take back a $5 million player, it's 200% plus 250,000, right? It's got to kind of fit within there. The middle bracket, that's the big bracket, and this has expanded. In this CBA, you see a lot more trades as far as those teams that are not in the apron. We saw a lot in sign-in trades last, I think in the offseason in 23. Max Strus, for example, goes from Miami to Cleveland. This is salary that's between that 7.5 to $30 million range. That's a huge gap. Outgoing salary plus 7.7. If I'm trading a $14 million player for a $7 million player, like that works, right? As far as for the team acquiring that $14 million player, as long as you're not exceeding the apron and some of the other rules. And then this is kind of the big bracket, right? $30 million plus 125% plus 250,000. Gordon Hayward, I think fell in that bracket last year when he was traded from Charlotte to Oklahoma City. The brackets increase as the salary cap grows. So if the cap is going to grow in 10%, the brackets increase as it goes with it. Same with the apron. The apron grows, and I think that's a big thing. I know everyone basically is throwing bows and arrows at the Players Association as far as with the rules and everything like that. We kind of hit a little bit of a perfect storm because the cap only grew 3.4% this year, and that triggered basically kind of a slow growth. When things increase by 10%, which is likely going to happen, the flexibility comes in more. Teams have more money, teams have more flexibility. The apron levels increase here. But those are your three brackets. Certainly if you have a trade exception, there are teams out there that have created a trade exception. The brackets kind of go out the window because now you have a $10 million trade exception that was created from a prior trade, and you acquire a player making $7 million. You don't have to look at the brackets. You already have that. That exception there.
Right. So this is the expanded traded player exception. That's the execution right here. And if you use this, your team has a first apron hard cap. So that means that any teams that are above the first apron, they can't use this. And these are what you would call simultaneous trades, in that they're happening all at once. Jordan, let's go on to the next slide. I think it's let's go to 22, the standard traded player exception. This is the version that everybody has. The apron teams have it as well. And this is where you're trading a player and you're able to take in basically like they were a gift card, and you could do it simultaneously or you could do it within a year. So you have a year to use this gift card. And so if you're sending out, for instance, Karl Anthony Towns, the Knicks have basically a gift card for 49. Well, I guess it would be the Wolves. The Wolves have a gift card of $49.2 million. They can use that gift card. They can't pad it. They can't take in more of that because of the aprons. The under apron teams can pad it by 250. The over apron teams cannot. But they have like a gift card, and within that gift card, they took in Julius Randle, they took in DiVincenzo, they took in Jeffries, Charlie Brown, Dwayne Washington. And so they're taking in via a gift card. That gift card is basically, it's like it has a balance and they can use all of it. It expires within a year. So they're using some of it simultaneously to take in the players immediately. And if there's a balance, which I could look up, if they still have a balance, then they can use, for Karl-Anthony Towns, they have a balance of $4.7 million. So that's how teams outside, that's how the Suns can make a trade to take in Nick Richards. They had basically a gift card for Okogie, and Okogie has to make more than the player because they can't take in more. Taking in more is the previous slide that Bobby went over, the expanded traded player exception. So we're just trying to break down just a little bit of rudimentary stuff. Let's go on to the next slide and talk about a hot button issue on my X/Twitter feed last night.
Eric's the expert in aggregation, so he can explain it.
Lordy. So I guess I wrote a theoretical, it was like a week or so. I don't know. It was Julius Randle. They asked me, Bleacher, my editors asked me like, hey, what would it look like if Julius Randle were traded? And so I came up with something where he went to the Bulls, and I think the Warriors were involved, and the Bulls got Kuminga and they got Julius Randle. I thought it was an interesting deal. And I have Luka Garza going also with Julius from Minnesota to Chicago. And so the immediate response I got was that from a fan last week or so was that they can't do that because they can't aggregate Randle and Luka Garza. And I said, well, who are they aggregating for? They're not aggregating. They're sending Luka Garza and they're sending Julius Randle, but they're not aggregating to take in a player. And that was that, I thought. And then last night, somebody got very upset that I would ever suggest such a thing. And they threatened to reach out to you, Bobby. And
I did see that. I reported you to the CBA police, Eric.
So I explained that, it's not the rule. I swear it's not the rule. And please, if you want to tag Bobby, please do. I'm sure Bobby. And then the person did apologize the next morning, but then they said they were upset because Bleacher's a terrible site. And so in the apology, they were also berating. So I've blocked like 2-3 people in all of my time. And so I decided, you know what, this person, because they went on a tangent. They lost their minds about this. Look, whatever. It's a rule. Why are we getting so upset? People are crazy. It's all good. But understand that you can send out more than one player. It's the aggregations when you're combining to take in more. Now these over first apron teams are allowed to aggregate. So that can be confusing. The second apron teams cannot. So for instance, if the Suns wanted to take Grayson Allen and Yusuf Nurkic and go get Jimmy Butler, that's out the window. A better example might be the Bucks. If they want Jimmy Butler, they can't do Middleton and Portis, but they can if they also get out of Pat Connaughton. So I made up I think I published it the other day. The Wizards taking on Connaughton and getting compensated because they have a Gafford trade exception. They could take him into that, and it all fit together pretty nicely. And there's a bunch of nonsense, but if they ended up under the second apron, now they can aggregate. Now they can go get Jimmy Butler in the way that they need to. So a first apron team can aggregate. It's not an issue for anyone below the first apron, but it is an issue for the above. But just don't mistake it for sending out more than one player. People just assume like, oh, you can't send from Minnesota to Chicago 2 players to get stuff back because that's aggregation. And the way that the NBA allows teams, you have the way it's reported. Bobby, Shams, the ESPN, Bleacher, we'll report what's going on, but we're not going to break it. I mean, Bobby will then break it down.
Yeah, we don't want to listen. There's the trade, right? There's the Jimmy Butler gets traded for XXX, and then there's like the semantics of actually the mechanics of the trade. Like the trade is broken up into multiple different things. Like it could be, these 2 players were traded for this player was traded for that player. Like Eric's talking about aggregation, and I think people get confused. Like if Phoenix wanted to trade Ryan Dunn for example, with Jimmy Butler. With Bradley Beal. That's not aggregation because certainly got to worry about Miami taking back more money because Beal out, Butler in, that works, right? You don't need to aggregate the Ryan Dunn contract with that to make it work. It's the only way aggregation is impacted, as Eric said, is like trying to make the money work. If you're trading a $16 million player and a $14 million player, and you're taking back a $30 million player, and you're a second apron team, that don't work because you're actually aggregating that money together.
Yeah, it's easy to get these rules confused. Of course, it's okay. I mean, I honestly still get tripped up on some things, and I know Bobby. It's just the nature of what we do. But Shams and Woj before him probably aren't as interested in the details that Bobby and myself will be interested in those mechanics. Like they probably just care. And I obviously can't speak for them, but my guess is that they care about the headlines and the body of what got moved and don't really care necessarily on the level that, Bobby and I like to geek out on this stuff. And if you're here, you probably do as well. Let's jump, Jordan. We're going to touch on a couple more points. Let's go to 33, which is on the draft pick rules themselves. And then we're almost done with our material, and then we'll go to Q&A soon after. So what's the deal with draft picks? Why are they so, first round picks specifically, why are they so challenging to move, Bobby?
Well, certainly when you look at first round picks, there's basically a monopoly of teams that control them, right? When you look at Oklahoma City, Brooklyn, Utah, you could probably put Houston to a point in there. There's a group there. The other thing is that you're operating within a 7-year window, right? You don't have an unlimited supply of draft picks to trade. You can't trade a pick in back-to-back years. If it leaves you without one, so that's called the Stepien rule as far as for that. But when you look at it here, as far as 2025, the years we're operating in right now is 2025 to 2031. Those are the allowable draft picks to trade. If I wanted to trade 4 first round picks, if I'm Memphis, for example, I can do that. 25, 27, 29, 31. I've got all my first round picks. You're not allowed to trade you're not allowed to trade 2026. That's not allowed here. So that's why it gets a little bit confusing when we say that Phoenix had only a 2031 first available because they had traded picks in a prior deal. That was the last one to do it. I think people get confused because we talk about, and certainly it's a topic to go into detail down the road, is when picks get frozen, right? If you finish in the second apron, your 2030 second pick will get frozen after this season. And people are like, wait a minute, there's a loophole there where I can trade that pick and the league won't know. Well, no, because we're operating in that window right now. Or 2032 is not available to trade. It's only between 2025 and 2031.
Yeah, let's jump to we might as well just touch on the Stepien rule a little bit.
Yeah.
Let's jump to 37 to just show an example. That's Phoenix Suns kind of. So they just acquired 3 firsts for their 2031. And so it is a little messy, not because of us. It's messy because the Suns are a little messy in their accounting here. But they can trade 20. Let's see. Let's see here. Let me get this right.
You could do like a poo-poo. You could do like a poo-poo platter. You can trade 25 and I don't know,
27,
28. Well, let's say 25 and 28, right? You can do that, but then it restricts you because then you can't trade 27, you can't trade 29, right? You see how it's, once 28 goes out the window, then that kind of restricts you as far as what you want to do. In a perfect world, you would trade 25, 27, 29. Like that would be the maximum allowed that you can move in a deal.
Those are the worst picks. So yeah. So what the Suns did is they traded the best first that they had left, the pick that probably most teams would want in 2031 because it's so down the road. Who knows if Booker is there? KD's probably retired. Beal is done, and if they're getting Jimmy Butler, he's old enough that he's probably also done at that point. But they traded it. And what it gave them was 3 pretty mid or crappy firsts. But what it did is it allows them to either do 3 firsts in the odd years or 2 firsts in the even years, because they traded 2031. They can't trade 2030 because of the Stepien rule. So they can do the odds 25, 27, 29, but they're not very good. Or they can do the evens 26, 28. Of those, 26 is the lowest of Memphis, who is very good, Orlando, who is very good, Phoenix, who is arguably very good, potentially. And we're talking about next year. We're talking about the 26 draft. So how do teams project that Memphis, Orlando, Phoenix, and Washington will be lousy, but it's protected 1 through 8? And you're getting the lowest. So you're basically getting, what, 25, optimistically, 27. So it's not a great one. However, 28 is now the best pick that the Suns have to offer, because Philadelphia is obviously struggling right now, and their money doesn't look great with with Paul George and Embiid's availability. Phoenix, again, who knows what they're going to be in the next couple of years. And then Washington is not very good right now. Now, you're talking about 25, 26 next year, 26, 27, then 27, 28. 3 years for these teams to grow. And the NBA, like a month in the NBA is like a lifetime. So to say 3 years, but teams like, if you look at this and you're trying to project what's going to be the best, the 2028 is the best pick they have to offer. But now that if they trade that, they only have 2 picks to offer, 26 and 28. So we'll see what mess this is. People are like, oh, they're definitely getting Jimmy now because they made this trade. I think they made this trade with the deadline in mind to increase their flexibility. I think the 2030 first pick was probably more valuable directly in getting Jimmy Butler. But if they can't get to Jimmy Butler directly, maybe this was an intermediate step. So do you have any other thoughts on the rules before we jump into Q&A? And I want to talk a little bit about mastery as well.
No, I think that kind of, let's go back. Let's just go back to the 36, Jordan. So this is Golden State. Okay. They owe a pick to the Wizards in 2030 if it's 2130. Okay. In theory, you could trade 26, 28, and 30 if it's 1 to 20. So you basically could trade like 3/4 of the pick. There's no guarantee that team is going to get it. I think people sometimes get confused because sometimes I say, well, the Lakers have 3 firsts to trade. Well, in theory, it's like 2 1/4, right? Because it's like the 2027 pick that's owed to Utah. It's, I think, top 4 protected. Like, you could trade that part of it if you want. There's just it's probably highly unlikely that it would probably get conveyed there.
Yeah, if the Lakers deal with Utah, they can just unprotect it outright, and then Utah gets it. And I could see if there was a Kessler deal to be had, that would probably be a part of it. But that's neither here nor there. They can trade. They can swap. That's another thing is that teams will do. So if Golden State was going all in, they could do 25, 27. They can't do 29. So then you say, okay, we'll do 26, 28, and maybe part of the 2030, and then we'll do a swap in the other years. If you're doing something like that, it better be some move that is getting Donovan Mitchell, where you're Cleveland and you really believe that this is going to catapult you to among the best in your conference. And you never know. There's always risk. You do know when it works, and you do know when it doesn't work. But when you make the trade, you simply don't know. So we could argue, did Minnesota make the right move with Gobert to do a similar kind of, here, take all of our stuff kind of move? Well, it got them to the conference finals. They're not as good this year. These are questions that you may not have an answer for 2, 3, 4, 5 years until you really know if it was the right deal. But Jordan, let's go to number 38. And Bobby, I wanted to ask you a few questions about this as well.
Yeah.
So last year you updated our videos, the original CBA Mastery with the new rules. What's different in CBA Mastery version 2? What's in the curriculum?
Everything. Everything. We basically overhauled all the videos that were done a year ago. The CBA was basically kind of in a transition period. When it was introduced in 2023, there was phasing rules that for basically kind of like all the apron rules and the extension rules were a little bit different a year ago. That's, starting this past July, that's changed. So basically what we did was we shot probably 4 to 5 hours of videos. It's broken up into 20 different sections, whether it be extensions, exceptions, aprons. There's a list of different things that you can learn about into videos. We have Google Slides that that come with it. You could, if you're watching, you could see kind of all the information out there. You get a cheat sheet, you get terminology, you get basically kind of like everything you want as far as how to learn the CBA. Certainly the CBA 1 edition 2, the PDF is online at Sports Business Classroom. You can download that with it. But this is, if you enjoy kind of books on tape, I would say this is kind of like you're learning. If you're going out for a walk and you're, you got your phone with you and you want to listen to stuff, you can certainly go out and do that. Practice tests are in there. There's a lot of wealth of information that's included with this.
Yeah, and I'll speak for Bobby to say that he's generally very generous with his time, where there is a place you can put questions and ask him.
Oh yes, you get access to me too. How's that sound?
He's very generous with his time. It may not be like in the next, like immediately within 30 seconds, but sometimes it is, to be honest. He's pretty quick. And if you do, from just watching this webinar, being a part of it, until February 5th, you get a discount, 20%. Promo code trade deadline, one word, all lowercase, and you can go to cbamastery.com to check that out. If you're looking to 1, be an agent, 2, work for a team, or 3, you're just really want to understand this stuff, it's probably your best resource out there. And then I also want to remind you that if you're interested in going to Sports Business Classroom, the Vegas Immersive, we haven't announced any dates yet. Summer League which is obviously our parent, they just announced the dates, I think July 10th through the 20th, which is very, very cool. So at some point, I don't know, I can kind of reverse engineer when the dates are. They haven't even told us yet. But we can kind of figure out when we're going to do our Vegas program, which is a blast. Last year, we had 135 students, and I don't know if we can take any more than that this year, just based on physical requirements. We'll debate that as we start to plan the new year. But if you are interested, just go to sportsbusinessclassroom.com. Jordan, if you could drop that also into the chat. There it is. Sign up for the early interest list. I know we already have a very long list. It's already over capacity, but not everyone signs up. So please join. And then when you're notified, usually off of that, there's an early bird pricing, but don't tell anyone that. So if you sign up in that first batch, it'll be cheaper than if you wait until a month or two out. So but yeah, let's dig into the Q&A. I'm a little hesitant, a little scared to look. Let's see here. We've got quite a few. So we are going to try to go 30 minutes and try to call it there. I know that I've got to pick up my wife's car at a flat tire and it's repaired and we got to pick up the car. So all right, so let's go right to this because this one, Bobby, this is PD Pete. And we're answering live. So this was on my X/Twitter right beforehand. And some people had asked me about the Miles Turner's rumors to the Lakers, of which I said, I don't know that there are any rumors for the Lakers. And then I think they cited you as like a suggestion of like a Rui or this, that, or the other thing. So did you report that the Lakers were getting Miles Turner, or did you speculate?
No, I think for the 100 people who are on here, and maybe we can blast this out to Twitter. When Eric and I do articles and we write about this trade would work and this trade fits, like that's us talking, right? Like that's like us putting ideas to paper and seeing what fits. I do appreciate people taking it very personal, but that is not me with inside information from the Lakers or from the Pacers as far as and why. And when we do this, like for the trade guide, for example, I'm looking at it from the perspective of the Lakers. I don't care what the Pacers, right? Like the Pacers are going to get their own section. So if I'm looking at it from the Lakers, okay, what can I trade to get Miles Turner? I have two firsts. It's 1 in 29, 1 in 31. I have Rui's contract, right? I can't take back more money. I'm looking at all the different apron rules and all that stuff. So that's the concept as far as the thoughts behind the Miles Turner trade to the Lakers. Listen, I went on SportsCenter this morning and they asked me like, hey, what do the Lakers need? I said, listen, they could probably need a center, but it would probably cost them. And then I said, well, what's the center from Indiana? Right? Indiana's a top 6 team in the Eastern Conference. You can say Turner's on an expiring contract. Maybe we're scared that the cost, we're going to be a luxury tax team. That might be something you just want to wait and figure it out in the offseason. Simple as that. You're not forced to go out and do that.
Yeah. I'll say that when I write for Bleacher, they specifically love multi-team trades. It dates back to the year that Russ was traded, D'Angelo, Chris Paul, Lowry, Conley. I was just fooling around. Actually, I was in my Discord with former SBC students, and I was just saying, hey, I wonder if this would work. And we just kind of I came up with something that I thought was neat. Said to my editors, hey, you want me to write this? And they're like, yeah, go ahead. And then it did incredible numbers. So then they were like, hey, can you do it again a few months later or something similar? So I was like, yeah, sure. Now it's literally like every week or every 2 weeks, I'm like knocking out multi-team trades. I look forward to the deadline being over. However, I would say that what I put into them is I put into the needs of all teams. And I do research to at least vet as much intel as possible. But I'm not saying that these are being discussed, and that's never framed as such. If it is, I would say that I would write, this is breaking news. I would write whatever. So, all right. So I think we answered that. I hope PD relatively well. So this, I go ahead, Bobby, answer this one. I think this.
Go ahead. We got
Thomas. What is the thought process involved in evaluating the opportunity cost to be a team that gets involved in trades for big contracts as a third or fourth facilitating team? So maybe like if a Washington or a Detroit got involved in the Jimmy, but Toronto, what's the incentive?
I think the incentive is that if you can pick up a couple second round picks, right? I think that's the goal is if you can, not about, certainly if you're taking back a player and the team is including cash in it, certainly there could be a cash incentive if you're going to make an extra $1 million from it. There's certainly the incentive if you're the Wizards and you're trying to get involved in Brandon Ingram trade, but you don't want Brandon Ingram, but I want another player from a team because the Pelicans are trying to get under the luxury tax. There's a cost associated as far as the more the years that player has on his contract, the more that you probably want. If a player's on an expiring, maybe it's 1 second. If he has 2 years left, maybe it's multiple seconds, or maybe it's 3 seconds here. Teams like the Wizards can do that. They're rebuilding. Draft equity is important to them. You certainly have to, where Brooklyn is in an interesting spot because technically they should be a third team facilitator because they've got a lot of trade exceptions, but they're only 667,000 below the luxury tax. They're not going to go out and trade for a $5 million guy if they can get 2 seconds, because the ability to recoup, $18 million in luxury tax distribution is greater than probably those 2 seconds they can get.
Yeah, I will say I talked to a team's GM just a week ago, and they said that the Pistons have been very greedy because they're the only team with cap room, and they're starting with a first for their cap space. Now, that's where they're at now. That doesn't mean that the Pistons won't evolve and take less, but if you can profit with youth prospects, draft picks, or in the case of the Pistons, who are actually a team trying to win now, maybe they've shifted away from all of that and are actually looking for a player that can help them win and actually make a playoff run. I'll just throw in for Jeffrey Landon, when do trade deadline conversations heat up? How much sleep do you get during the week of the deadline? I would say that there is not a lot of sleep leading up to the very end of the deadline. From the people that I talk to with teams, it is a very sleepless time. And I'll answer another one, J Mac, real quick. I did write on the Bucks, and I think I wrote on that how they could possibly get Jimmy Butler. think I wrote on that. If I didn't, it might have died in the. I think I wrote on that recently. At this point, it's all a blur. But we talked about it earlier. They have to get out of Connaughton, probably to the Wizards. I think that's the trade I wrote. And then after that, if it could be one transaction. They have to end up under the second apron by the completion of the transaction. So from a micro trade point of view, that leg of the transaction would technically have to happen first, the Connaughton to the Wizards. There are way too many questions than we will possibly get to. This is a good one, I think, for you though, as well, Bobby. Max Emmerich. If we're butchering names, we apologize.
Yeah.
But how often are GMs communicating with owners during the deadline, specifically on Thursday as the clock ticks?
I mean, you basically have speed dial because everything has to get rubber stamped by the owner because everything that will have, whether it be taking on more salary or giving up a draft pick or how it impacts your future, everything is run by the owner. Everything is approved. Usually how it works is that, your front office group has basically kind of carte blanche, right? Like if you think it's a good trade, you present it to your owner and you make a hard sell on it, right? And they'll ask you questions. How does this fit? Why are we taking back this money? Is it worth going into the luxury tax? And you basically give the justification. At the end of the day, they should have full autonomy as far as what gets approved and what doesn't get approved.
Okay, I'll answer this one. This is a good one for me. Anonymous is saying, is the SBC Sports Business Classroom in Las Vegas a sign up and you're in process, or is it an application? It is an application. You need to do a cover letter and you need to include your resume. I and my staff will look closely at it. At times, Bobby might look at it as well. And really what we're looking for is, we don't want people to come to this as a fantasy camp. It's not somebody who we only want people who are serious about trying to break into the business of basketball. That's what it is, the business of basketball immersive. And so it doesn't have to be someone trying to break in with a team. It's somebody who might be trying to go and work for, an agency, any of the ancillary industries attached to the NBA. It can be media broadcast. It's so many things, but we do look closely and we don't just let people in. We will fill up. So at some point we have to start to make difficult decisions. I would say your odds are higher when you're doing it earlier because there's more space. We have to get a little more pickier. More picky rather, as it gets a little closer to the deadline of just capacity, which is outside of our control. It's just it's first come, first serve. But we do vet very carefully. Bobby, you can answer, I think, on some level. Fletcher Redondo is saying, when you're looking at a multi-team trade at the deadline, what system or process does a front office use to track all of these moving pieces and just ensure that it's compliant in real time?
Yeah.
How does it work?
Well, I mean, listen, when I was with the Nets, it was a lot different because our department was smaller. Nowadays, teams are like 70 deep. You've got like 6 people who are direct, you have 6 strategy guys, 4 cap guys here. There's certainly somebody that's whether it be kind of maybe a junior level that you're kind of tracking it. Not just, I think the beauty of it is not just what you're doing. If there's a trade tomorrow, you're basically kind of going through the exercise of how it works with CBA and everything. But yeah, everybody should have an understanding as far as if you're Brooklyn and you're showing Marks and he's calling a team, as far as what they're proposed. I talked to a GM earlier this week, and they're like, you'd be amazed how many trade proposals we've gotten that don't work within the CBA.
Yeah.
I mean, like that's the reality here. So I do think it's kind of like, it's your strategy guys, your cap guys, you're basically teeing it up for the person who's making that phone call there, as far as that it's compliant.
Yeah. If there's value, in what I do for Bleacher, writing the articles that I write, I hope that I'm part of my purpose is to sort of teach, okay, here's an idea. And then I actually dig into how complex it is and why it's not simply X, Y, Z and why there's all of this. And a lot of it for me, I've already done the work so that when an idea comes to me or I'm trying to vet something, I at least have done a lot of the legwork already. But it can take a very long time just to make sense of it. Especially a multi-team deal. And if you can imagine trying to get something like that done across the threshold on deadline day, an hour or two before the deadline, it's just not going to happen. You're not going to be able to get like a 4 or 5 team trade if you start an hour before the deadline, unless it's like you have 2 trades that are already in process that don't work and are close, and they might join them. But that's not what we're talking about. If you started from scratch, if there's a GM who has or a basketball exec who has a reputation of approaching other teams with those kind of last minute things, it would be Daryl Morey. At least talking to other teams, that's what I hear. Okay, so just to clarify, Rick Thomas, about step-in rule. The main thing is that a team can't ever, in any circumstance, not have a first-round pick every other year. So if you have a pick in 25, you have to have a pick in 26. You have to have a pick if you trade 26, or let's say you trade 25, 27. You can't trade 26, 28. Now, it doesn't have to be your own pick. It can be a pick of any kind, but it can't be top 20 protected, and maybe it conveys the next year, because that's a maybe. There can't be any maybe with the step-in rule. So it is a very strict rule. There are a lot of ways around it, and we see teams be creative in getting around it, but ultimately there's no loophole. It's just you have to work within the rules. This is Brian Goins asked a very good question here. Can you explain why Dennis Schroeder is eligible to be aggregated in trades prior to the deadline after recently being sent to Golden State? According to Spotrac, that's our friend Keith, his aggregation restriction expires on February the 5th. So they do have a new rule that was snuck in. It wasn't really announced as a rule. It was something that was in the fine print, that if you trade somebody as of, was it December 15th, they're going to let you trade that person as of the 5th. It's just a new rule. The basic rule is that there's a delay of 2 months when you trade someone, that you can't aggregate them for 2 months. So for instance, Nick Richards, it's not a good example. Dorian Finney-Smith can't be aggregated. Or Shake Milton is a better example. Like the Lakers got Shake and Dorian, and let's say they wanted to do Shake and Jalen Hood-Schifino, they can't aggregate him for 2 months. But because of the new rule and because of the timing of Dennis, and that might have been a motivator for the Nets, it might have been a motivator for the Warriors to execute it on the day that they did because of this new rule. Robin, what's up, Robin? I haven't read your question yet. How much do you think teams are considering future expansion teams and draft picks? That's an interesting one. In how they approach trading future picks. Is there really anything to worry about? I don't think so. So expansion probably takes 2-3 years from the time that they say it's happening to them fielding offers, to then deciding on a team, to then giving that team like a year to ramp up and having an expansion draft. I don't think that teams are cognizant and focused on those sort of nebulous ideas. It's more what's in front of you right now and what is your team's approach? So I don't think that's really relevant, but it is a thoughtful question. So thank you for that. Bobby, I do have a question for you here from J.R. McHenry. Bobby, have you ever been in a situation like Atlanta is right now? I'm paraphrasing, with Jalen Johnson getting hurt right before the deadline, and does it maybe force you to pivot, recalibrate deadline plans?
Well, I think Atlanta's different because if they were, let's say, if they were Boston or Cleveland, or if they were that a championship level team, I think it does probably expedite maybe you going to do something, a quick fix for that injury. I think where the Hawks are though, certainly they have no control over their first because it's going to San Antonio. And I don't think you should worry about that when you're going out to make a deal. But I think it's more, I don't think there's an urgency all of a sudden that you have to go get a replacement, and it's going to cost us the Lakers first and the pick in 2027. I think it's just based on kind of where the situation you're in as far as from where you are in the standings.
Okay, so Evan Smith, I guess I'll answer this one. How do trades that occur at the beginning of the deadline affect the market? Example, how much does the Dorian Finney-Smith trade affect, say, Bruce Brown's value? So there is sort of a cascading effect of the price being set on what Dorian Finney-Smith went for, what Dennis went for, that other teams will sort of base their logic on. It is not unlike getting comps for real estate, where you say, well, this house sold for this amount, this house sold for this amount, and our house should sell for more or less because ours is bigger, ours is older, or whatever, yours is older, whatever. So there is some level of that similarity, but there's always context. There's perceived desperation of the buyer. For instance, if AD and LeBron are pushing heavily that the Lakers need a big, and you look at the track record of the Lakers generally in that they have historically overpaid in trades. Now, they didn't overpay necessarily in the Finney-Smith move, or, we could debate the Rui and some of the other moves, but mostly over the course of the last X amount of years, teams might look at the Lakers and say they're in a bad leverage position. So a comp might not match like the real estate value, so to speak. So it may or may not actually come into play. We've got about 15 more minutes. We're going to try to get through. I'll just say that like Victor, I can't say the last name, Couche Iglesias is saying, after seeing how the current CBA has played out so far, what adjustments would either of you suggest to improve its structure or address early challenges? I'll just say that part of it doesn't matter as much as this would be a great conversation and we should have it, but we should have it probably in like 4 years or 3 years when we're getting closer to the new rules. They have I think it has an opt-out after 6 or something like that, or before 6. It's like a 6 or 7 year deal. The rules are as such as that they're the rules. So I know from my point of view, it's more about adapting and working within them. We also need to get the feel of what the new TV deal does to the cap. Bobby mentioned that it only went up about 3.5%, a little bit less percent this year. That has to do with the regional networks cropping out. It had to do with some bounce back out of the pandemic. It has to do with players or teams overpaying last year. The players didn't get all of their escrow back. That lowered the cap a little bit. So there are a lot of factors into why the rules are as such. I know that people have very strong opinions. I find that I can poke holes in most of the detractors very easily. Some of them, there are some things I don't love. I can argue I don't love that the mid-level and the biannual can be used as a trade exception, because I do think from the agent point of view, it could hurt with fewer teams. Teams already didn't spend the full mid-level in general, and they took the second round exception to kind of give that back, but then they took it away at the same time because it can be used in trade. So it's a good question. I would say reach out to me outside, and you can reach out to Bobby as well via X, Twitter, or if you keep bothering us, we'll probably give you our contact information. And we would love to have those kind of conversations. Best bet, sign up for Sports Business Classroom, and then you can actually get us in office hours or in a lounge, and we could sit there and argue for 2-3 hours, because that is a 2-3 hour type question. We only have about 10 minutes or so to wrap up. So what do you think about Dallas, Bobby? This is from Ben Everett. Do you think that?
Well, I mean, listen, they've got a ton of injuries, right? I mean, that's kind of like where they are right now. When healthy, I think they're up there with these Western Conference teams. The history, as he says, in their history has shown that they're making big deals, right? Like, always known for kind of singles and doubles. PJ Washington, Daniel Gafford. They've got picks in 25 and 31 to go out and trade. Be careful of the apron. They're right up against, I think they're like 526,000 below the first apron.
Yeah, I can argue like a Yabusele type, someone making it cheap, but again, they have to they have to send out. So maybe they're trading Exum, which is probably good because those two got into a pretty vicious fight, Exum and Yabusele. So if they're bringing in Yabusele, I know Exum's hurt and he's not playing. Bobby, I'd like you to answer this one as well. This is from Alpha Bangura. Hey, Bobby, I believe you mentioned that in CBA Mastery 2 is also useful if you're trying to work in the NBA. Can you elaborate on that and give some examples of how that could translate into jobs in the league? Thank you, Freddie.
Well, I think it's kind of twofold. I think certainly CBA Mastery and all the resources that are provided, it's for you to kind of get that general knowledge as far as how this system works, right? That's kind of That's the most important thing. I always say, and I've said this at SBC, if you're interviewing with a team, and maybe there's a strategy position or a cap position, like they want to know as far as how you can contribute, how you can help, how do you know the rules, what's your portfolio, all different things. Certainly the SBC Immersive that we do, Eric and I do in the summer, plays a huge role into that too, because besides the curriculum that we provide during the week, there's also that networking aspect where we're bringing speakers and the people to talk at lunch, and there's it's kind of getting your foot in the door with that.
Yeah, it is the combination of everything. Building your network is, I think, the most important part. But in terms of the class itself, like whatever you try to do, you need to know your skill. If you're a point guard, you have to work on your ball handling, your court vision, your passing, and your outside shot. And so this is that you're building up your tool belt. So if you want to work for a team in the front office and you want to work on the strategy side, you have to know this stuff. If you're looking to become, for instance, a coach, maybe it's not the most important thing. Maybe you want it as an additional skill. I'm going to answer a couple quick ones real quick. How do you balance expectations, egos between players and ownership? Very carefully. That was from Anonymous. Robin, I'm just going to say that, like, your question about where do draft picks start to fall off. I did an analysis some years ago, and like realistically, lottery, top 5 your hope is an all-star. Lottery, you're hoping for a rotation player. After the lottery, you're hoping for somebody who's, I don't know, maybe in your rotation. It depends on the year too. Some years, you're almost guaranteed to get a starter or a really good player in the 20s. And some years you're lucky to get somebody who's on your team in 3 years. So there's no hard and fast rule. And it varies team to team, because some teams are much better at drafting than others. Some draft for upside, and then some draft more conservatively, getting an older player who they're pretty confident can be a rotation player, but they know they're not getting someone who has that all-star potential. Which is knowing. I say that in quotes because there is no knowing in this. I'm going to answer this one with a little bit more vigor and passion because I disagree with the premise. This is from an Anonymous. Recently, the Knicks exploited a loophole in the CBA during the cat trade by paying Declan Jeffries, Charlie Brown Jr., and Darius Washington $1 over the minimum, allowing them to combine these contracts. Are there other similar loopholes coming to mind? Those are not loopholes. Those are just using those.
Yeah, the league doesn't like when we say loopholes, right? Like, it's like loopholes mean like, hey,
They're not loopholes. They use rights. It took years, 1, 2, 3 years to get the rights to those players. So
they had non-bird, right? Those guys had non-bird rights, or right?
I think they had higher for
maybe early bird. I think Jeffries might have been early bird.
Yeah, like no one's in this question. There's no mention of Zeller, who's was in the Nance.
Sorry, Zeller. He's in the protection program.
The DeJounte Murray trade, right? Like, you have the right to pay the player up to a certain number, and you have the right to pay them as little as the minimum. And if you negotiate if anything, the agent gets a 4% commission instead of 2% commission. So, I mean, is that a loophole? No, it's the rule. And the PA, when they teach the rules, will tell you if you get your client $1 more than the minimum, you're gonna get a higher commission, 4%. These are there to get to the second part? Are there other loopholes? Every so often, there's like a gray area in the CBA where, like, there's actually a loophole where there's something that isn't clear. And a team will take advantage of it, and then they'll iron it out in the next CBA. I really just think it's just about being good at what you do and being creative and not saying no. Find the yes within the legality of the rules, and just being clever. Clever is in and of itself a loophole for some teams that are not clever enough. Not saying I'm any more clever or Bobby any more clever than people in these jobs. I also know that there are the realities of you can be as clever as you want. And if you have an owner who doesn't share your vision, or you're a very clever strategist and the GM just doesn't like funky stuff and wants to play it straight, and just do simple stuff, then it may not matter. So these are always a complex web of trying to get things to happen. I've been doing this for a long time, and I know that Q&As like this, no matter how fast you go, incoming questions will outpace you. So we're not going to be able to get to everything, but we do have a few more minutes. So this is an interesting one. How do teams measure the overpay to get the deal done?
That's a good point. So, oh man, I think, listen, if you're, I'll just De'Aaron Fox, for example, right? Like if you're San Antonio and that's, team maybe where he wants to go to, you're probably overpaying because you don't want to wait until 2026 when he becomes a free agent, or if you don't want him being snatched up by another team. I always say this, that the threat of a player not signing with you, I think you have to kind of take that with a little bit of a grain of salt, especially if it's a player that's got a year and a half left on his contract. We went through that with Darren Williams in New Jersey. Traded for him. There was no guarantee that we were going to re-sign him. Gave up a bunch for him. Once you get the player in your under your roof, makes it a little bit easier to kind of work with him. And as I said, you have the ability to pay him more than any other player out there. De'Aaron Fox, whoever trades for De'Aaron Fox, or if it's Sacramento, can pay him, I don't know, $85 million more in a regular contract because he's got bird rights, or in the extension, or different variables there. So I think you have to take that into consideration as far as is he a rental? Is he long term? How much am I willing to pay? Whether it be draft picks for that player.
But while I have your attention, let me get one more here. Let's see. Actually, I wanted your thoughts of this one as well. I actually meant to ask you this earlier. Kyle Tannenbaum says, what do teams internally do when something leaks that they didn't want out? There have been instances of teams changing course because of public reaction to leak, but I actually want to pivot that and including that. Like, we just had Shams break this, big news that De'Aaron Fox is available, or want to trade him.
Yeah.
Who, why, was it, without giving away trade secrets, like, what's the motivation for it? Is it the agent? Because I think De'Aaron recently denied that he asked for a trade. So maybe it was the team. And, how do teams utilize, yourself, your colleagues, me, and such? And, from the team side, what is the purpose and how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can look at it two different ways. De'Aaron Fox has not asked to be traded from Sacramento, but he didn't sign an extension this offseason. Right. So, you could basically take that with, unofficially you're concerned because here's your window to move him because you're concerned he would commit long term. Right. So how it gets out usually is that I'm sure there were numerous teams that have called Sacramento in the last week or the last 2 weeks. We live in a day and age where information gets out, right? So, hey, I heard so-and-so called the Sacramento and offered this and that. It's like the telephone game, right? And by that time it gets to Shams or me or you, and we kind of pick up on it. How does it benefit? I think it could benefit Sac. Well, listen, it's a distraction. If you minimize the distraction, I think it could benefit you because it gives you a gauge as far as what the market of De'Aaron Fox could be, right? As far as what is out there, as far as from a trade perspective, like the Jimmy Butler situation is a different animal, right? That's in its own brand as far as whether it be a distraction or what's out there with that. We had Brooke Lopez. Brooke's name was in trade rumors for 3 years. I mean, that's the reality of it there.
Yeah, I'm gonna our friend James DiBiase, who has taken care of us with our aprons, which we'll have to celebrate at some point. He's asking a question that is sort of piggybacking on, like, he's basically asking about like how vocal Bernie Lee has been on Twitter. Does this hurt or help the situation and the market before the deadline? I mean, I don't know that it hurts or helps. I think they're forcing their agenda, and I think Bernie's approach is very much like, we don't give an F. He's gonna come after Shams. He's gonna come after whoever's at him. And Bernie, I know Bernie pretty well. He's trying to get his player what they want. And if the Suns are like, we will give you exactly what you're asking for. Let's say he opts out and signs a 3-year deal, which is the most he can sign. We're not saying an extension where he, can only add a couple more. We're saying he gets to free agency, gets the max he can get for 3 years. If they achieve that, then the answer is Bernie's doing a hell of a job. And if they get a 2-year extension at the max, I would still say that Bernie's doing a hell of a job, even if it's maybe not their 100% goal. I don't know what the answer is because, it's the 29th. We'll find out on the 6th pretty soon or before this.
Yeah, listen, it doesn't. I thought yesterday's stuff was kind of humorous. Certainly as far as kind of, what's that?
Make it light.
The teams get scared by it. I don't think so.
You're getting Jimmy. You should be scared of getting Jimmy if you're not going to pay Jimmy. And if you have a happy Jimmy Butler, you get a nice player. If you get a disgruntled Jimmy Butler, you don't. And he's not afraid to be Jimmy Butler. So we've answered either live or in typing 49, and we have 31 left.
Yeah.
And we're pretty much at time. So I see a lot of names, even SBC people. I'm going to touch on a couple of quick questions that are, I think, important. Is there a PDF for Bobby Marks 101? If you go to, this is from Lloyd Hervey. If you go to sportsbusinessclassroom.com and you just be on the website for about 5 seconds, there's going to be a pop-up and you have to place in your email, and that should get you access to the PDF for his cheat sheet. And that is a free item. That is not something that you need to pay for CBA Mastery. Speaking about that, Jordan, you want to pop up the CBA Mastery visual one more time? And there's too many questions in here, and I feel bad because we would love to give everyone. I see Rohan, I see a bunch of other.
Down to 28, Eric. Down to 28.
Okay, yeah, well, one of them just says thanks, so that's a good one. So you're welcome. If you are interested in CBA Mastery version 2.0 with Bobby Marks, go to cbamastery.com. Make sure you put in the promo code trade deadline, one word, all no caps. Offer ends February 5th, 2025. That's a 20% discount for our webinar attendees. It is a really wonderful program, self-directed study. And like I said, you get some level of access to Bobby and myself, and we're pretty generous with our time in helping make sure that you learn this stuff. And then sportsbusinessclassroom.com itself is a great place. First of all, just go there and you'll get access to Bobby's cheat sheet, the PDF, and then you can sign up and go to the early interest list for Sports Business Classroom or Immersive in Vegas, our Business of Basketball Immersive, which is honestly my favorite program, my favorite event of the year. It's probably the most exhausting. I think Bobby can attest to that. We definitely put in our hours, but it is really well worth the time. And we were talking about, for instance, the Nets, Makar Gavorkian, who did actually the virtual during the pandemic times, but he quickly after attending, he did some private tutoring with me on the CBA, and then I helped him prepare for an interview with the Nets, and he got that job and has been promoted like 2, 3, 4 times by now. He's your main strategist in terms of salary cap. Wonderful guy. Buddy Scott's another former SBCer who is the strategist for the Celtics. I think he's the first salary cap strategist they've hired for Zarin since forever, really. So I appreciate all of the additional questions. I wish we can get to all of them, but we just, unfortunately, there's just too many. So and it came in so rapidly, which is a joy, that we probably didn't even read it. So email or hit us on Twitter and say, hey, I didn't get to answer this in the webinar, and we'll be happy to do it. I'm at Eric Pincus, ERICPINCUS. Bobby, are you Bobby? Just put your handle on Twitter.
Oh,
I don't know. Is it?
I'm on Blue Sky too now.
Yeah, I'm on Blue Sky as well. I will answer that.
I did a Q&A on Friday. I think I'm going to do another one on Friday. Just kind of open it up for like 20 minutes and you can fire
On Twitter or Blue Sky or both?
Blue Sky.
Okay, yeah. I've been trying to do more and more. on Blue Sky.
Twitter's a different animal as far as opening up that Q&A.
Yeah, that's true. So with that, I want to thank everyone for joining. As I said, apologies if we didn't get to your question. It's been a joy. I'm very excited to see what transpires over the course of the next week. I know Bobby is too. If you want to see Bobby's analysis, you'll find it on ESPN. You'll find mine on Bleacher Report. I'm looking forward to not writing fake multi-team trades, although I enjoy it thoroughly. I am ready for a break for at least a month or so, however long they give me till I start mapping out off-season trades. So, but I'm Eric Pincus. This is Bobby Marks, Sports Business Classroom, and thank you for your time.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of the podcast. Take your knowledge to the next level today with our new in-depth education course, NBA CBA Mastery Version 2. Whether you're inspiring to work in the NBA or just want to level up your skills off the court, this course is for you. Sign up and start learning today at cbamastery.com. Like, subscribe, and leave a review on social media and tag us on your IG story at Sports Business Classroom. This episode is also brought to you by Hall Pass Media, a full-service marketing agency that specializes in brand consulting, event management, digital marketing, and creative design. For more information on Hall Pass Media, go to hallpassnetwork.com. See you next time.